I've been doing a lot of talking about healers and waving around this magical word, barriers, as if it's some kind of panacea cure-all thing that we should all live and die by. And don't get me wrong, they are important, but it is also vital to not overemphasize their importance and be like, you always need barriers. That's just not a true statement at all. So this video is really my attempt to clear the mist on barriers with real numbers and some context. Now more than ever with Endwalker coming and this differentiation between pure healers and barrier healers, it has a lot of people, whether they're returning players, veteran players, or the like, asking, what the hell is actually going on with barriers? And that is the entire point of this video. So I'm actually going to try and start this out with the easy part, which is talking about numbers and what the different healers can actually produce in terms of shield values. So the white mage is really easy. It has no AoE barriers, and their only barrier comes in Divine Benison that is a straight up 500 potency single target barrier. The white mage is largely off the table for barrier discussions here given that fact. The Astrologian has a baseline single target shield called Celestial Intersection quoted at 400 potency. However, the AST is able to get shields in Endwalker through the ability Neutral Sect, which is no different than today for Diurnal. The single target shield is going to have a potency of 600, and then the area of effect is going to have a potency of 300. When we're talking about barriers, 300 is actually a pretty significant number for reducing the spike of incoming damage, and this is why Astrologian's Neutral Sect is often cited as being busted and broken, just for that extra level of versatility. And yes, Celestial Intersection and the single target barrier do stack up to a mind-blowing 1000 potency. I guess with the buff that would be 1080. Currently in game, Scholar's the only barrier healer that is actually going to continue into Endwalker. And when we're talking about the Scholar, it is truly the barrier monster that lurks behind the scenes with a ton of options to enhance barriers, to layer them, split them up even into different cleaves, whether you have a 2 60-second split or a 3-way 45-second. The Scholar really gives you the most options for AoE barrier application. If we're talking from a pure progression perspective, which is what most raiders are doing, like most raiders are not doing parse optimization runs, they're just trying to clear or do a basic farm. It's really going to come down to AoE mitigation and making sure that your squishy DPS don't combust. Scholar has a metric ton of tools for making sure that they don't explode. So for Adlo, which can be made into an AoE effect every 2 minutes by deployment tactics, is quoted at 375 potency, already being the Astrologian shield. Succor, however, is the baseline AoE shield and is at an honestly quite an impressive 225 potency. It's significantly lower than the AST's 300. Succor and Adlo do not stack in any capacity. The larger shield overwrites the other. Don't think that you can like stack Adlo and Succor. Scholar, however, can eat Dissipation their fairy to get 20% more healing, which impacts both Adlo and Succor. It bumps up their values to 450 and 270, which to say the least is far more significant. A barrier quoted at 450 potency across the entire party is already 50% stronger than what AST can do. But on top of this, the Scholar also gets Seraph with pet potency scaling at a quoted 0.82, and I know the number's a little rough here, but pet potency is a little bit lower for whoever's not super familiar. But 300 multiplied by 0.82 is going to give us 246 potency shield. And they can apply Constellation twice, which is really nice because you get that like trailing effect. It's like you can mitigate the first one and then you have a little bit more for a chip. But most notably, Constellation is going to stack with Adlo or Succor, which is really where things get fun. Now I'm going to throw in another monkey wrench into this system where the Scholar also gets the ability Fey Illumination that can boost this all by another 10%. I'm only including this because it is in reality something that the Scholar has in its own kit, in its own disposal, and its own control. AST doesn't really have anything in parallel, but this results in you adding 10% to all of the numbers from before. So this results combined all together in the Scholar's maximum shield of Seraph Constellation plus Adlo plus Fey Illumination at 683.1, basically 700 potency. When we compare 700 potency to actual heals in game, we can see that that's going to be about 40k HP, or I guess the HP bars display it now pretty well too, I guess. So at about 40k HP, that's a pretty impressively large amount of HP. But this also comes at a cost. Similar to the AST, these big cooldowns we use to layer on the shields was Fey Illum, Deployment Tactics, and Seraph. All of those are at 120 seconds. And I mean, in a very crazy theoretical world, we can also make things absolutely disgusting by adding in Dissipation at 180 seconds, but Dissipation is on 180 seconds, so way longer than 2 minutes. But my point is, while these are long, generally speaking, when you are approaching mitigation of a fight, it is very possible, especially with a static, to plan out who is using what and be like, okay, the Nocturnal AST is going to do this, the Scholar is going to do this, oh, the Scholar is going to do this with the White Mage here. Like, much more common than putting all of your eggs in one basket is a Scholar could approach mitigation by splitting their cooldowns in something like a 3-way split for 45-second intervals of raid-wide damage. Or honestly, with a co-healer that is planning with you, probably 60-second split intervals. Seraph and Sakor can add up to about 500 potency shield, and then you can apply Fey Illumination with Dissipation, remember 180 seconds on Dissipation, with Adlo, spread the Adlo, that's another 500-ish potency shield. I will note here that Cure 3, which is very powerful burst heal, is quoted at 550 potency, just to give you some reference number. Roughly 33-ish KHP. Now I want to take a note on the Sage, and going through the Sage's toolkit and all the details that have actually been revealed and sussed out from the community, it's obviously leaning more towards healing rather than pure barriers, just making the Scholar the most barrier-tastic healer. But even if you combine Panheima's 200 potency shield with an assumed exact copy of Sakor, you're only getting 200 plus 225, which is 425 barrier every 2 minutes. I state this because Panheima is going to be at a 120-second cooldown, which is significantly more than even AST can put out when it's in neutral sect, so that's not to say that it's not impressive, but it doesn't have that same flexibility that the Scholar does, or the ability to spike it to 700 potency if you really want to blow everything. And really, this flexibility with the barriers is really where the Scholar is going to really excel above any other healer in this department. Having that flexibility between choosing a split or a really powerful spike or multiple different splits is really definitely something that's invaluable at times. But those are the numbers, and while things can definitely be a really pretty picture if you look at just the numbers, let's get practical with barriers. When it comes to healing, most of you listening already know that the most important HP is the last one. Anything from 100% max health to that one last HP is where healers in Final Fantasy 14 at endgame have quite literally mastered the subtle art of making our tanks crit their pants, or us just shrugging casually at the DPS that took chip damage, knowing full well that the Weave of Whispering Dawn and EOS casting Embrace will make that go away as the DPS just vibrates in fear. And it's in this zone that we are usually playing in that pure healing through things like Plenary Indulgence with Rapture, Whispering Dawn, Sacred Soils Regen, Astrologian's Collective Unconscious, and many more abilities are going to dominate. The truth is that barriers aren't always the answer. In fact, in the incredible majority of content, you can really get away with not using them. In fact, even in Savage content, until it is a specific key moment, you don't need barriers. But when it really does matter, it does actually become quite an important consideration. In extremely difficult mechanic situations where having that extra buffer of 20k or 40k HP health might keep you above 1 HP, that's when it starts to become a really big factor. You see this in instances like E12S's Terminal Relativity, where the spikes of damage are extremely high at times, although undeniable that this mechanic is also a raw HPS check, because in reality you have non-stop streams of incoming damage. Another thing is E11S Electric Cycles, where the party is in the insanely difficult position of needing to spread out as they eat mechanics, spreading being the bane of healers trying to catch you with AoE healing. And this is where barriers, while they might not be completely essential, I'd argue they are in that instance, especially if you're not overgearing the content. The barriers can quite make a difference in any snafus, foobars, making the mechanic transition smoother rather than panic healing, even if you do survive. That's another thing to keep in mind. A lot of new players are coming into Final Fantasy XIV and they're looking at people who are already in best in slot gear. They're not looking at like minimum item level healing, and that's where barriers really do make the big differences, is when you're not out gearing everything. Always keep that in mind, that a lot of new players aren't seeing actually how important it is, because when you outgear the content, of course you're going to have that extra HP buffer. But when things are getting really raw and new, that's when you start to be like, this might really make us get through this. It's always an important thing to keep in mind whenever you're talking about barriers. But even when we look away from just generally geared, the really big trick is that most raiders are in progression, and while you could theoretically optimize everything and make sure every tank is using specific cooldowns, every cooldown of like ranged DPS or the monk's healing boost is used all at the same time, you can theoretically get away with not putting out barriers in like pretty much every Savage raid. There might be a few exceptions, like maybe Terminal Relativity hits too hard, but I think that you can also get away with it there. I think barely, but I think you could, especially with Echo. The main thing is when you're doing progression raiding, this is very different than optimization raiding, where someone has cleared the fight fight 50 times and they know it inside out and backwards like the back of their hand, mistakes in progression rating, which is what most of us are going to be doing, happen. We're not overly familiar with the fight. We haven't cleared it 50 times when we're doing our first clears, which means mistakes happen. Barriers are going to be that added layer of protection against snafus or situation normal all fudged up. Any raider who's done savage raiding or ultimate raiding knows this so well. Snafu happens even when you know the mechanic. I want to bring up the interesting case study that many raiders have cleared savage with just white mage and diurnal astro. Not nocturnal, which is the barrier healer, but Diurnal, which is what we're going to be seeing in Endwalker as the pure healer form. They've gone away with it scot-free because AST has that powerful neutral sect ability to use barriers at exactly the right key moments. E11S electric cycles, bam. E12S at that point, bam. Real problem comes here where you don't have barriers during a spike of damage. More than anything, keeping a solid buffer out when crap hits the fan can save some special moments like the tank forgot to use Reprisal in Dark Missionary, or oh no, where's Shield Samba from the Dancer? Oh wait, they literally are texting right now in the middle of raid. Or simply put, at the end of the day, it is a lot easier and a lot calmer to recover from a snap of 100% HP with a barrier to 40% HP rather than 100% HP down to 10% HP. 40% HP, I personally recovered the party with a simple Whispering Dawn and Sacred Soil heal over time trickle many times. 10% and I'm gonna be in a bit more of a panic. And probably my co-healer too. Barriers can also be used at times to buy time for other abilities to be used. Take that same E12S Terminal Relativity, which obviously hits incredibly hard, but after that you get basically chip damage AoE spammed at you. They are very easy to manage stuff at the start. But when she gets damage up buffs, then all of a sudden that joke chip damage suddenly becomes deadly. And you know that that next AoE cast on top of all of those little explosions is going to hurt severely. Which brings up the property of barriers that is very overtly obvious to anyone. They only exist until they're broken. They act very differently from other mitigation spells like Heart of Light from Gunbreaker or Shield Samba or Reprisal. These effects are going to last their entire duration to reduce the damage. So an idea is you could have a Scholar go balls to the wall mitigation and produce the most monstrous barriers that they possibly can as you go into Terminal Relativity so that the entire party can mitigate the last chains of their horrendous damage. You know, when a barrier literally makes absolutely no difference just because there's just that much damage being spammed non-stop, that's when you can really get the maximal benefit out of all of those big long duration buffs. And alternatively, your co-healer white mage, don't have them use Temperance at the start or the AST neutral sect at the start, have them use that instead at that super painful oscillating burst HPS monster at the end. That really brings us to the conclusion of the video. So while barriers are great and while they might not be absolutely necessary, in fact in easier content like even expert roulette's arguably completely unnecessary overkill, they are an extremely valuable resource to have on hand, and when properly used can alleviate a metric ton of pressure off the team by reducing incoming spike damage or allowing better usage of abilities. Anyhow, that does it for this video. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Genuinely curious actually.